I will get started here with building an employee crisis response plan. We have Perch Peak, we have Sabbatical, Doist, and also Oris from the Ukraine joining us. And I can't read his company because it's in Ukrainian, but basically it's how do we support and relocate employees in time of war, pandemic, and natural disasters. So Charles will help me here by going through the slides. First, I'll introduce myself, and this way you can understand, okay, why am I qualified to be here? My name is Lona. I am the head of revenue. What I do is build revenue channels for SafetyWing. First, I started out building a team from 0 to 14 people in the sales side. Now I'm building out the partnerships team. And I'm also an advisor to many different startups, a Y Combinator founder, and have been a remote worker since 2008, and kind of like a global citizen. I don't have a home, just kind of like go from place to place. And I'm very happy to be here with you. So Charles, if you want to go to the next. So on the agenda today, we're gonna have a quick poll to see what the makeup of the group is today. We're gonna go into our panel discussion and then into Q&A. So the first poll is if your organization is borderless, let us know. We can submit here as okay. So we have more than 50% that are in more than 6 countries. This is really interesting because we've been doing these webinars for a year now, and the number has been increasing of those that are in more than 6 countries. So that's kind of interesting to see. But yeah, get your poll in. We're going to close it here in 2 minutes or a minute. Okay, we can close it, Charles, if you want. Okay, so then, yeah, as I mentioned, 46% of you said that you're more than 6 countries, and the majority is in 2 or more countries. About, yeah, 28%, it's just in 1 place, which is fine as well. Let's go to the next slide. So who are we at SafetyWing? Many of you don't even know who we are. So we provide global benefits to remote workers and distributed teams. So think about those companies that are hiring workers all over the world. Instead of figuring out benefits country by country, they can buy one kind of like benefit package, and it includes all the countries in the world except the US and a couple of different ones. So we're in about 180 countries. We're building this global social safety net, starting with remote health and Nomad insurance. We're going to remote retirement, remote doctor, remote therapy, lots of fun things to really complete this global benefits package. Therefore, you can compete with the big companies like Google and Amazon to offer really great benefits. That way your team can stay with you, or you can attract the best talent in the world. Next. Okay, so without further ado, I would invite the panelists to turn on their cameras and please introduce themselves one by one. Maybe we'll start with Paul first, since we have you first here, and then Chase, Oris, and Yona.
Perfect. Cheers, Lona. Lovely to meet everyone. I'm Paul from Perch Peak, and sorry I don't have a parrot on my shoulder today. I know it's disappointing, but I'm one of the founders and CEO of Perch Peak. Very quickly, we help people to relocate around the world. So when you're moving from the UK to Spain, or from Spain to San Francisco, we help you find a home, get your bank account, choose where to live, ship your stuff, etc. So all of the painful things to do with relocation, except for visa, immigration, and tax. We don't do those. But yeah, that's me, and thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Lona. Great to be here again. Love these webinars. Lots of great information. So, Paul, I could have used your services. I'm an American expat currently living in Spain and traveling around, living actually in France as we speak. So I work for Doist, which is a fully distributed company of about 100 people in 35 different countries. And my role as the head of remote is really to make sure that we as a fully distributed company are operating at our most peak efficiency as possible and advocating for the future of work and remote work. And so I'm very excited to discuss with you how we're approaching global events and such today. It's something that I've been working on the last 6 months, 6 months, and it's been a very interesting ride. So thanks for having me.
Now it's my turn. So hello guys, I'm Ukrainian blogger Orest. I visited like over 129 countries to be precise, and running a digital company, also with the media for the last 10 years, being a digital nomad, traveling all around. But now like I'm in Ukraine. This is not a bunker, by the way, behind me. Yes, and since the first day of the war, our team completely shifted from the marketing campaign and all this like regular marketing services to media representation of the war topic and spreading the word. So that's basically what I'm focused at the moment now.
Yeah, thanks, Lonan. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I'm Yona, account executive at Sabbatical. We're basically a tech-enabled service provider working on trying to just remove friction from labor mobility. So we do similar stuff than Paul's PurchPick does, but we also include then visa and immigration, which obviously is a process that cuts down a lot of trees today. So we're going to try to minimize that by making it a bit more digital. That's what we're doing at Sabbatical.
Awesome, very cool. So hello everyone, and thank you. Thank you for coming back here. Now let's start the panel. I really want to discuss obviously what's at stake here. So as a lot of companies, obviously we saw the pandemic and now the war in Ukraine, natural disasters are happening all over the world. How do companies and people that work for them, like HR manager, people ops, head of people, as well as founders, CEOs, how does one be more proactive about these things versus reactive? As we saw the last 2 years with the pandemic, all the governments were pretty much reactive, even though they were warned that a pandemic could happen. I think Bill Gates gave a TED talk about this years ago. So what can we do as companies, and maybe share your experiences, guys, what you've learned, kind of like being reactive and saying, oh shoot, like we have to figure this out. Let's put a plan in place. What does that plan look like? Who is involved? And all of those good things I want to ask you guys, and then leave enough room at the end for questions. So maybe, I don't know, who wants to start off? Just so you guys know, I met Orest a couple of weeks ago in Dubrovnik. I was really impressed that he was living in the Ukraine and also came for maybe a week or so to promote Ukraine still, even though it's a war zone. He wanted to make sure that, hey, we are doing fine, and we are still working. We are going to be okay. We want still people to come to Ukraine and visit us at some point. So I thought he would be great to be on this panel as well, just because he's really from the center of gravity, what's happening right now in geopolitics. So yeah, I don't know who wants to take it.
Probably using this endorsement, I will start. Yes. So like on the ground level, I would recommend everyone who is listening to read the book, The Black Swan, which actually tells us that most of the crises are not really a surprise, and it's possible to predict those. Although the people are such creatures that we only learn on our own mistakes, and it's hard to take it in other way. In terms of those three crises, they are very different. Yes, if we're talking about the environment, pandemic, and the war, so definitely there are different reactions on all of those. But probably apart from the COVID, the environmental issues and the military conflicts happened before in the past. So it's possible to look back and see what companies did in those situations, what went good, what went bad, yes, and obviously take the most useful lessons from this. For example, I'm now in Ukraine, yes, and the war that's now is starting, and that millions of people had to move actually, will be a great and tremendous experience for the future events in all around the world. But if we're talking from our own internal perspective here, the Russian invasion that happened 3 months ago is just escalating of the war that is lasting since 2014. And when it was invasion of Donbass and annexing of Crimea. So having that experience, many companies were already kind of prepared to possible escalation, and many like production lines have been moved from the east to west 8 years ago. Yes, many IT companies were relocated as well. So that was kind of not a surprise, but still, like, people like knew what they had to do. And I think further in this more points that we are going to discuss, we're going to dig deeper about what like the actions should be. But that let's leave it here for the start of our panel. Mm-hmm.
One of the things I find so interesting about that is, you know, at Duis, for instance, we've been remote first since our inception 15 years ago, and we have people spread all around the world, and we just experienced a pandemic. And on the silver lining, or the bright side of that, was for us that we didn't really have to, because of the way we were structured, we didn't really have to change much through the pandemic. We all kind of went about working our day-to-day. We were all working from home or for wherever we were located, and because of the way our team was distributed, we didn't, when the war in the Ukraine began, we didn't actually have a plan in place, despite having just gone through a pandemic, which you think would have raised the alarm bells, or if somebody had read The Black Swan, that you would have thought that we would have something in place. And so I think one thing that's kind of interesting is, like, even some of the very veteran teams of the fully distributed workforce and teams that went through a crisis of some sorts, I've talked to a lot of leaders out there who didn't really have much of a plan in place. So having that foresight, I feel like, and taking those steps ahead of time, having some sort of plan in place, which I'm glad we now do, and we can dive into more, but just having the foresight and being proactively thinking about this ahead of time, and preparing for those Black Swan events, is something that I think is super valuable in and of itself, just to have that on the top of your head.
Yeah, that's an interesting, and it's super interesting points for both. I'm probably going to slightly contradict you there, Chase, from our point of view, in the sense of when we were, and certainly like our stage as a company, and this is a very Perch Peak perspective, when this crisis happened, and it had a huge impact on our company, which I'll come on to. But we had just finished our Series A. We were super small, sort of around 50 people. At that stage, for us, there's 150 risks to our business that might cause us to fail. You're super small, and so there it's kind of a question of focus and prioritization for us. And obviously, in theory, we'd love to be super prepared for every possible crisis and eventuality. But I think, where it's something so unexpected, obviously, if you have amazing foresight, amazing to have a plan. But for us, I think it was just as important just to be super agile when it did happen, and then respond to that. And I think from that perspective, we were fortunate to be able to take some of the learnings of, we were just getting going at the start of the coronavirus pandemic, which for a company that helps people to relocate is potentially really bad news when you're not even allowed to leave your home. That's not great for business. So that was really good in terms of being able to agile and move quickly. So we took some of the lessons from there. But I think for us, it was more about, actually, let's not worry about this. We have to be sort of really focused in terms of which downside risks we're prioritizing, but be able to move really rapidly when unexpected events do happen. And that was something that we took from the first crisis, rather than trying to necessarily plan for every possible crisis in advance, certainly at our stage.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to back up on Paul on that one, since we also work in the relocation industry. And actually, funny thing is, Sabbatical used to do recruitment and headhunting, and decided to pivot into immigration and relocation. And 7 months later, the pandemic hit, which wasn't obviously great news for business, right? So what we talk about a lot internally is change muscle, being able to adapt to situations, and even within a situation that you could predict. So such as the war, it was predictable. Within that situation, there will be minor changes all the time happening, such as government changing their policies when giving visas to people fleeing war zones, for example, and you having to adapt to those situations on the go. So yeah, from our side, definitely being ready to adapt and build your change muscle, you can actually do that. So that's definitely a big thing for us.
Awesome. So then maybe since Chase was able to build this kind of plan, I'm very curious to ask him, where does one start? Like if you don't have this plan and you're kind of like going as things come at you and you're being flexible, where do you start? And I'm curious to hear later, like what did you learn from that? And now that you have this in place, do you feel a lot more prepared?
Yeah, I've learned so much going through this process. It's obviously a very sensitive subject. You're dealing with people's lives essentially, which it sounds like everybody here on the panel is involved in, somewhat intimately on a day-to-day basis. So in this case, we went from being this company where we don't really care where you are, when you work, what you're doing during the day. We're super asynchronous, so it really didn't matter to us, to suddenly needing for a subset of our teammates to be very involved in their lives and helping them locate visas, perhaps find employment through an entity in order to get that visa in various countries around the world, sponsoring those, figuring out what our budgets were in terms of how much we could help financially and what standards we should put in place. So setting some expectations and some baselines around how much will we support in terms of legal fees or relocation fees. We started advancing salaries, but we had at first we said we should advance salaries just in case people's income gets cut off. How many months salary should we do? All of these things had to be analyzed. How do we distribute money to people if they're unable to access their bank accounts? So we started issuing virtual credit cards with people's salaries in place. So each one of these little things, I'll be glad to go as deep as we want on them, but they were all finely tuned and discussed in depth at the highest levels of the company. And I was happy to kind of lead that charge, but it took a lot from a lot of individuals. One of the things that I think goes unmentioned when I would sometimes, and it's a very basic thing, but sometimes as I was digging into this, the most core thing that I think you could do, and which I got a lot of positive feedback from, was to set the team up for success by saying things like, we expect your work to be interrupted right now, reducing their obligations in the office, ensuring that people feel safe, disconnecting from work to focus on these things. They're very complex situations, and obviously you're going through a very draining situation personally. So it sounds very obvious maybe and basic, but I think it's worth mentioning because we got some positive feedback on that.
And Chase, just to clarify, you guys had team members in Ukraine, or where?
We actually don't have any teammates in Ukraine. We have some along the borders in all countries surrounding Ukraine, and including employees in Russia.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, I mean, at SafetyWing, we did put a team together just for the Ukrainian crisis. And basically what we were doing is that team was just responsible for figuring out, like, okay, where are the border crossings? How can we give this to the Nomad community, to the kind of like the remote worker community, so that they can distribute it. We were also posting all of the jobs that are remote that the Ukrainians can also access. So those are some of the things we were doing, but we had to kind of build a kind of like a team for that.
How did you think about who to be in that team, though? Because that was something that was challenging for us.
Yeah, it's a great question. We at SafetyWing are very much believers that we suggest, okay, here is the problem, and who wants to come up with a solution, or who's interested. So basically, we choose the people that are most interested, but also capable to do that job. It's not about like, oh, Lana, you're going to have this job now, good luck, kind of thing. It's more about like, okay, do you feel called to do this? And we did have quite a few people that were called to do that, and also they were very qualified. So they took that on, and we actually helped quite a few people with the information that we were providing on a daily basis.
Very
but
cool.
we didn't have team members in the Ukraine per se to relocate. But a lot of companies did come to us for insurance, because they're like, oh, you know, we need to get 50 or 100 people out of the Ukraine. We need to move them over to another country. What do we do? How do we provide them with health insurance? So we did have quite a few companies come over and not have a plan. So it's nice to have a plan which moves with you wherever you go. So if you have to be displaced, you're able to go live, let's say in Spain, or go live in Poland in the case of Ukraine, but also still be covered with health insurance.
Yeah, and that was something we saw a lot, was lots of companies asking us to help relocate people, particularly out of Ukraine, but also out of Russia. And I'm sure it was the same at Sabbatical. And I think one of the things that those companies found hardest was, and we found hard to help them with, so I'm curious to get your perspective, Chase, is how generous should they be in that situation? Because typically relocating employees is really, really expensive. And typically it's not lots and lots of people at once, which it often was in this situation, because it's a one-time event, and it's also typically very, very urgent. And that was really challenging to sort of figure out in these sort of very unique, you know, no company had a policy for this type of thing, or very few did. How did you think about how generous to be? Obviously, there was so much intention to help, and we couldn't believe how internally passionate people were about supporting both our teammates, but also other companies. But in terms of actual cost, how did you think about how generous to be?
From our standpoint, we had no idea like where to start. Like I had moved abroad, I had gotten visas and moved around a little bit, and in my role, we talking about ownership, you know, we take a similar approach to SafetyWing in that we pass ownership depending on who's interested and capable. And I love that approach. And so in this case, it did seem to make sense for me to lead this charge. But I didn't have a ton of context. I lived in a few different countries. I managed my own moves, but we didn't know about some of the fees that were going to be associated. So really, we just started digging in. We started saying we're going to help as much as we possibly can. That's going to be in terms of thousands and possibly tens of thousands of dollars. But we have to figure this out as we go. And so we were sort of building the airplane as we flew. And eventually now we have a plan, although we've already spent a lot of that money on the individual situations. We now have, okay, here's what we think it costs based on what we've experienced now. So it's learning as we go sort of thing.
Yeah, learn by doing.
That's so interesting. And actually, Oris, you said something interesting before we went live. You said that a lot of companies that saw the war coming, they started, you know, getting places around the neighboring countries. Can you elaborate a bit more on that? Like, what did they do? Did they actually go and rent a place for 5 months, for a year? Was it an office, or was it homes? Did they put people in beds, or did people have separate living areas? I'm curious because this might help others to kind of build a plan.
So as you might know, Ukraine is one of the largest outsourcing destinations in the world, and there are many people who are remotely engaged and employed in Ukraine. Yes, and we have many of these companies that have over 5,000 employees. Already at this stage, in addition to multiple headquarters within Ukraine, they had some headquarters in the neighboring countries like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and so on. So it was like the first step where they could send some key members of their team, or they dedicate a particular group of people who will be managing this possible relocation. Yes, so even within the preventive measures before the war actually started, those team members were traveling to the neighboring countries, preferably to the places where they already had some kind of office, or even if not, they were already renting premises as the preventive measure, just in case, good to have it somewhere there, so people could move in. Yes, eventually. Some of them, if they wanted to go really far, they were also arranging accommodation for their employees, but usually employees take care of accommodation by themselves. Yeah, or maybe there is some basic, let's say, part, like co-living near the office, where they can come and spend some time before they like find accommodation according to their requirements. Yes, so these kind of things happen. Also, what I noticed is very interesting is that in my city, Lviv, which has with a population a little bit under 1 million, we've got over 30,000 people only employed in IT, yeah, which is a significant number for this kind of population. We have seen in the recent years relocating of Belarusian companies to Ukraine, and what they have been doing here is even like, let's say, buying some type of the building and refurbishing this to make an office and a kind of co-living space, yes, which would serve as the temporary shelter for people who simply move in before they find something they could have in their like for their requirements. Another thing to consider, which is Ukraine-specific situation, is that once the invasion actually started and the martial law was introduced in Ukraine, male between the age of 18 and 60 were not allowed to leave the country. So the perspective of relocating abroad actually disappeared, and mainly women started to leave, while all the men who don't serve in the army, yes, they moved simply to the west of Ukraine. And many hotels, because this is like a touristy area of the country with the mountains, nice geography and so on, they started to cater to companies instead of recreational needs, yes, and this also boosted the economy in this sector. So there are many transformative movements are happening, and it's really just I don't know, I would not say interesting, but it's eye-opening to see how industry is restructuring around that in general.
Great. That's a Yona, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, since Orest brought up the possibility of investigating territories nearby, then there is also the fact of immigration-wise getting a work visa, work permit to people. Many times you will need an entity sponsoring the work permit or visa for the person. And now throughout the European Union, immigration laws are relatively similar from one to another, and even the US, it's more or less standardized. But if you do not have an entity in the country, then it will largely vary on the country whether you can use what would be an employer of record to sponsor a work visa for you, for example. So this we saw that was very successful for several companies. About 3-4 weeks before the invasion actually then started, we could see companies starting to ask questions from us. Hey, can you help us here? Can we hire people? We don't have an entity. So this was something that, let's say, the ones that were able to move their workforce quickly were the ones who had made their homework early on and knew which countries would be more agile to get a work permit in.
So actually, if you use an EOR, can you use them as an entity and then quickly get a visa for your employees and contractors?
Yeah. So that's always going to depend largely on the country. So there are some countries that directly just simply do not allow that. And then it will also depend on the EOR that you're using. So that was a bit of a tandem in our work, at least. I'm not sure if the other guys on the call have experience, but one of it was doing the tandem work of, we got a request, now we got to find an EOR that will be able to sponsor their work permit, because maybe due to internal policy in one EOR company, they will not sponsor visas. So yeah.
I would like also to add here, going back to the country where we met Lona a couple of weeks ago, Croatia is actually the second country that's issuing digital nomad visas. The first one was Estonia, and this type of visa doesn't require any entity or any sponsor in that country, right? So the basic requirements there is like some kind of income which is relevant for the living condition in this country, and some, like, you have to prove some kind of savings on your bank account, basically, which tells that this person is not going to take the job of people already living there, yes, but he'll be like a spender in this country. And there's also approach for other jurisdictions to invite let's say, relatively wealthy immigrants, yes, to their location. Mm-hmm.
I think the first one was Barbados, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
Were you checking it out?
I think there's actually like 60 of them now. Like there's like 60 different digital nomad visas. So there's like lots of options. We evaluated a lot of those for our employees, the digital nomad visas and and using EORs. And we ultimately, like, we gave everybody the option. Of course, you do what you want to do as individuals, but most people were opting for the EOR route through an employer of record to actually get hired by an entity. That raised other questions though, because then social fees, they call them in a lot of the EORs, the fees that are going to be paid to the government, and they change when you move from one country to another. So what the entity as the company is responsible for versus what the individual is responsible for, this shifts quite a bit. So then you need to come up with your best practices and documentation around that. And obviously this changes country to country and origin country and destination country. So there's a lot of factors to consider there. And do you, as a company, do you cover those social fees for some period of time? We decided to do that so that somebody wouldn't take a big hit immediately if they were going to absorb, say, 20% higher taxes or something like that initially. But I mentioned that because the EOR route did end up being what most people at Doist opted for, and B, that those social fees can be hefty. So it's important to keep that in mind.
Awesome. I think we're at 35 after the hour. Maybe Charles, do we have questions from the audience, just to make sure that we are giving you as much value as possible? Just to take a pulse. Please, if you do have questions, send them over. But yeah, let me know how many we have so that we can leave enough time.
Yeah, there's three. Actually, there's a fourth that just came in. I'll put it into the Google sheet right now so you can take a look. But one of the questions, if one of you could just maybe elaborate on the on EOR, what it stands for, maybe some examples of those companies. We do have a couple of questions on that.
Okay, sure. So like EORs it's called an employer of record, and basically they allow you to have a legal entity in different countries where you hire, and you're able to hire people globally very quickly. You can just turn on, I guess, an entity within seconds or minutes, and you're able to hire anyone and anywhere. There are fees associated to that, so you do pay, per person that you hire, and each EOR or employer of record varies from each other. That's kind of like my take, but if you guys want to add a bit more.
Yeah, I think you summed it up great. And one other thing I would add that I didn't know before is that a lot of the EORs have what they call some version of a global mobility team. So hiring is one thing, which is what they're really set up to do, but that's just like the creation of the entity, the processing of their taxes and benefits, and making sure that you're legally hiring somebody correctly in a particular country. But then there's also the process of getting visas and getting people relocated and things like that, which is a whole nother piece. And a lot of those EORs will have that functionality as sort of a separate service within the service. So that was a nice learning for me.
Yeah, and from our side, like a lot of them have been really great partners for us, because even in this situation, it's obviously sort of a big rush of relocations due to the crisis, but often forward-thinking companies will say, yeah, you can go work here, we'll hire you through an EOR and then support. And yeah, but a lot of them have grown incredibly fast over the last 2 years since the pandemic as well. So they have a lot of relatively new employees as well. So there's a lot of just like knowledge to try and digest fast in this situation. A lot of very unusual circumstances going on, and I think everyone, and that was one of the amazing things from our perspective about this, was just across so many different companies in so many different industries, just the willingness to like knowledge share and just try and help as much as possible, even if it's not directly in your sort of typical sweet spot. People were just so willing to help, which is pretty cool from our perspective, and it was amazing both internally and externally to see the willingness of EORs to go above and beyond, but also lots of other people in this sort of wider ecosystem to try and help out in a tough spot.
Great. So I'll take the next question here that Charles has highlighted. What are the key elements a company needs to have in their crisis response plan? So this is actually a good one. Maybe Chase can get us started just because you have one, but I also kind of like have like 6 different steps that I can also mention.
Yeah, sure. So I think this is broken down into 2 different spaces. One is your external response and how you're going to respond as a company, and then and the internal response. So how you're communicating about this. So we needed to put standards in place for this. Like when this happened in the Ukraine, our internal communications went crazy, external communications went crazy. We had no standards in place for how to respond to these things and how to keep people moving in the same direction. So that was an important bit. And then the actual like pieces of what we're offering were like how to get people paid, how to make sure they continue to be paid, what the time off policy is, what the expectations are around their day-to-day work, how do we help them with legal fees, relocation fees, and entity creation as much as possible, and then just supporting them personally. So I can go deeper if we need to, but those are the bullet points for me.
Anyone else, or are we good? Great. Yeah, so for me, I think there's a few different points that I think are important. One is the risk analysis, so figuring out, okay, what are the potential risks that we will be faced in the future? Then kind of like a response procedure, identify the roles and responsibilities of that team that's going to take on these potential risks. And then the activation protocol, what does that look like? Determine when the action should be taken. Finally, the communication strategy, assess, who delivers the information and at what time. Do we do that publicly? How do we do it internally? An emergency contact, so include a list of emergency contacts, and then post-crisis assessment, really figuring out, okay, did this thing work? What can we learn? How can we improve in the future? But I will go to the next question because it was very interesting. So it was actually someone that has a team in Ukraine right now, and they're looking to support them with some counseling sessions with experts in war zone. Does anyone have an idea or recommendations here? This is such a great question, and it actually came up in the panel here at the World Economic Forum, where we're talking about improving all these systems in healthcare, but then we're not really talking about trauma that's being caused when these disasters hit. So the pandemic obviously caused huge trauma for so many people. We have a huge kind of like mental, wellness crisis. We also, the war has created definitely a lot of trauma for not only the people that were hurt physically, but also those that have to be displaced. So this is a really good question, and I wanted to actually ask you guys. So it's nice that someone from the audience did ask this. So I don't know if somebody wants to take a stab at that. I don't know, Oris, if you know someone that can help with counseling or mental health kind of experts.
Yeah. So before initiating this kind of policy, the person who is somewhere outside of Ukraine should understand the situation inside of Ukraine. Yes, and this is very important because I mean, now you're watching my video, you think I'm in a bunker, but actually I'm in my office that looks like this, right? And it's peaceful and really quiet outside. Just for you to understand. So I'm in Lviv, in the west of Ukraine. And this is the city that receives airstrike alarms, seldom long-range missile hits, but the risk to die from the war result is much lower than being hit by the car on the street, statistically, yes? So this is one situation. Another situation is that there are people who under constant fire had to flee their home, and maybe their house is destroyed now, yeah, and they're displaced in Ukraine or somewhere else. Then there are people who simply emotionally, let's say, weak, so they cannot handle the entire situation, and they have another type of problem. Then there is maybe a family who was separated because the man had to stay within Ukraine, continuing working remotely, even on the high paid salary, but his wife and children are abroad. And that's like another psychological issue, that the family is separated, even though they're in a safe place and they're doing financially fine. So this person who wants to initiate this kind of support has to understand what are the typical problems, yes, and basically all these different situations, they require different treatment and approach. And that's why definitely there are like so many organizations that moved into Ukraine. And just yesterday I had a lunch with the one British guy. They created the project Sane Ukraine in order to keep people sane, right? And they have a few different programs to handle the post this like PSD, or like what was the main combination of words? Yeah. So they have like a personal counseling, they have a group sessions, they have a remote session, and so on. But in order to make this kind of therapy, they need to evaluate the particular situation, how severe is the psychological damage of the person, and take it from there. So
Okay.
this is absolutely helpful, and something has to be done. I can share the contacts to those particular organizations. They're happy to help. Absolutely.
Please. So Sane Ukraine is one, if you want to put it in the chat, and then any other ones that you...
Ukraine, another one I just received now. They are I'm in contact with them. I'll give you just now. So Sane Ukraine. Another one is Tyl Volontera. I can write it in the chat.
Yes, please.
TYLVOLONTERA. Tyl.
Okay. And then we also have Spring Health. They offer global online counseling services, and one of the audience members just recommended them. So it's called Spring Health. Maybe if Charles, you want to type it in the chat, or you guys can have that there. Okay, we have 4 more questions, but I hope that answers that question with the team that you have in Ukraine. The next question coming up is, how do you balance psychological safety and productivity, especially for startups who live or die on growth? Wondering at what point should companies suggest a sabbatical leave, and for how long? This is a good question.
I'll be happy to. Paul, go ahead.
No, you go.
All right, yeah, I'm going to try to be quick so that Paul can have his input here too. So we both work with startups who live and die on growth, as well as are one ourselves. So definitely a big question. The one thing that we've seen to be like a really key factor to success is really putting focus first. So what does that mean? It means each employee or each team, please focus on only one thing. Don't try to help everyone to keep just one priority. Do not try to help everyone at the same time, because at the end of the day, it's going to cause a lot of anxiety. Probably it won't be very productive either. And at the end of the day, that just kind of turns against itself. So if we keep focus on the one thing that you can do very well, then you will probably get more done, and that will also release some stress and anxiety there. So focus is very important in this type of situations. Just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I think from our side in this particular situation, but also not directly comparable, but with the situation trying to create psychological safety for our team, it's trying to not sort of necessarily dictate to them what we think is best for them, but make it clear, as Chase said earlier, that we understand this is going to be a difficult time for you, that in this situation is caused by sort of a war, but it could be a family bereavement, it could be a wide range of issues, trying to make it clear that we understand if you want to take time off, but not necessarily suggesting it, because whenever we've done that in the past, or whenever we've sort of tried to not say like you should do this, then often we find that some people actually like continuing work because it takes their mind off things. Some people it is best to take time. So, and we try and just give them, the employee, as much ownership and flexibility let them know that we are here to support them and we'll try and be as supportive as possible, give them a range of options, but ultimately say, look, we're going to support you no matter what you do and what you need right now. And that's seemingly worked quite well for us in this situation and similar situations.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that we weren't like really prepared, but I should maybe give us like a little bit more credit. In a lot of ways, the structure of the way that we work is very, it allows a lot of flexibility and autonomy, and for people to decide when and where they are going to work best and to adjust their schedule as needed. And we're also very generous, I think, in terms of providing sick leave and working holiday days and vacation and all of this. 52 days in total per year that people have at their disposal to use. So in some ways, I think that might have contributed to us being a little bit less proactive, because we think, okay, you have all these days, you use them how you want them. Of course, it's a tough time. That's why they're there. But I think even going further than that and saying, there are obviously things much more important than making than new user signups or launching projects right now. Let's make sure to get you out of this. And that's very easy and obvious to say. I think obviously when you're in like a hyper growth situation, you're trying to keep your head above water as a company, that can be much harder to put into practice. So I guess my whole point there is like maybe insulating against that from the beginning, knowing, like Oris said earlier, that these events are going to come, and sort of preparing for the future by setting the infrastructure up that way.
Yeah, I do want to add that as a startup founder myself, not of SafetyWing, but and being in Silicon Valley, I understand all about growth and grow at all costs. But we are seeing that employee well-being is so central to our growth. So it does make sense, like Chase said and Paul, that you do give people that flexibility, you do give them those days off, and they will come back much more loyal, much more refreshed, and will do better for you. But also I want to warn those founders that raise at very high valuations, promising huge growth. You do put a lot of stress on the people. So make sure that you're also very reasonable when you're raising money, if you are in the audience. But that is something that's at SafetyWing, we've always been reasonable. And seeing the market was very frothy in the last couple of years, you could raise any sum at whatever valuation. We chose not to do that, and that looks really good right now, because we don't have to match $1 billion valuation, and we don't have to kill people over, or they don't have to kill themselves to get to $100 million in revenue in just 5 months, right? Because you have to match your kind of like what you raised at. So I also want to mention that. So it depends on the company, whether it's this like toxic kind of like grow, or whether it's more of a, like we're going to take care of people, we're going to have growth, but we're going to make sure it's kind of like steady. And
yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that as well, and something we've seen, is that trying to be incredibly transparent about our status as a startup, both in terms of burn and when things are going well, but also when things are going not well. Because what we see is a lot of people join startups because they want to feel like they're part of something and involved, and you don't necessarily need to sort of mollycoddle people and just give them all the benefits and just give them amazing news the whole time. A lot of people actually are really keen to have that transparency, and therefore understand that you are a company, and ultimately, like, if you run out of money, that's not good for anyone. And having that transparency has been super helpful when having tough conversations, but also meant that we're generous to the purchase, but also people are kind of understanding of our situation, and therefore want to contribute and help us to grow and achieve everyone's collective goals.
Great, we have 3 more questions, so I'll go to the next one. In which process of this preparation does the company take into account health and safety, and how is it connected to the possible scenarios? Example, working during war or moving to another work location. Is that location adequate to work within the H&S requirements? What is H&S? Health and safety requirements. So in which process of this preparation does the company take into account health and safety? Do you guys have anything to add to this?
It has to go first. Health and safety. Yeah.
It has to be the first thing that you consider. Yeah.
Of course. course. It's like the main value nowadays. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. The next one then is, how did you tackle compensation by location when employees choose to work from another country? This is a big topic. We actually had a webinar just on this, and we had like, I don't know, 300 plus people join because they were so interested. Again, this is something that you plan ahead of time, and you decide whether you're a company that will pay a flat salary, or whether you are a company that will pay by location. And if you choose the latter or the second, you'd have to kind of like figure that out on top of your crisis. But I'll let you guys add to that. We are kind of like a flat salary kind of organization across the board.
Yeah, I'm happy to start because it's something we're still working through at PerchPeak. We were initially founded in London, which is not a bad place for this type of thing because it's quite a high salary location. But then the nature of what we do is we do have to hire people in, you know, if we're helping someone relocate to San Francisco or to wherever. And so that started to challenge that sort of London-based flat policy, and we're still figuring out exactly what to do. But I think we are sort of at the moment we have 4 tiers of location, and that's what we've gone with for now. But it's a super challenging model. So if anyone has a perfect answer, then please send it to me on a postcard.
I don't have a perfect answer. I was on that panel that Lona mentioned earlier. It was very intriguing, and we've been doing this for 15 years and still don't have it figured out, and always want to reiterate on this. So I don't think there's a perfect way to approach it. We do adjust salary slightly. We have a formula that creates your salary based on your the level within the company, the impact that you're having, and then your location. The location is the least influential of those 3, but it does change the amount when you move. So fortunately for us, we have the formula in place. We just plug in the new location, and there's some great tools out there to give you, like Pay Scale is a great tool to kind of tell you what the baseline pay should be in a given location. So that's how we're approaching it.
Cool. Yona, do you guys have a certain way for?
We're flat. We're just like SafetyWing in that sense. We have a flat salary policy. Based on what Paul and Chase just mentioned, I'd say that we probably have less of a headache then. It sounds very interesting, but it also sounds like quite the puzzle to solve, right?
Indeed. Yeah, it does add quite a bit of things to it. Okay, so then we have the last question here. If anybody else wants to ask one more question, please feel free. One of the attendees says that he works in the outdoor industry, where there is a large risk of injury or even fatalities. What would you recommend for a crisis response protocol for debriefing near misses or after a bad accident? Yeah, none of us operate in the outdoor industry.
That sounds like tricky to me. Yeah.
But I would say that what we mentioned here, kind of like you know, a way like having a task force, like really, you know, posting, you know, what do you do in case of something like that, or how do you be more careful? Where do you communicate it? How often do you communicate it? Who are the people that you go to if something happens? And I would say it's very much, you know, very similar to kind of like what we discussed already. So I don't think it would vary that widely, but really having kind of like a team that's responsible, have that team kind of like make the protocol and then really kind of like execute on it when it's needed.
Two things that come to mind there. Like one, like transparency is super important. We talk about it a lot with remote work and having you know, a central place where people can access documentation and processes, and allowing people to contribute to that. We have this phrase like everyone is a documentarian, so constantly keeping those documents up to date is really important, I think, for this question. And then also debriefing, like we have a channel in Twist, which is where we do our team communication. That's like it's retrospectives, and so any incidents that happen, whether you know, on a personal level, a technical level, a project level, we do retrospectives there, and they're transparent, they're easily accessible. People can comment on them and come back and view them and reference them later. So I would lean into that for this question, I believe.
I just thought about the very simple scenario when the rope is getting broken, right? God forbid, and I mean, what happened afterwards. So basically, there is a kind of, should be a manual, obviously, for any type of product out there. And then even if something happened, there is also should be like the investigation or verification process, because in this case, even 1 pound more or less could be defining, right? To project who has the obligation in the end. So that's has to be very specific here. Absolutely.
Great. I hope that answers your question. In the meantime, I think, yeah, if that's all the questions, we can give back a minute to your day. And yeah, thank you so much for joining and for being here. I would love to invite you guys to the next webinar. I wanted to thank, you know, Orest, Paul, Chase, Yona for being here. Really appreciate the answers. And you will get a video of this webinar. Everybody will, so we'll distribute that after, as well as, yeah, connect with us on LinkedIn, find us on LinkedIn, and we're more than happy to expand our network. So thanks again, everyone, and see you at the next webinar.
Thank you very much.
Enjoyed the chat. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you.